Go ahead. Oh, got it. I had to say got it. Got it. The title of this is How to Be the Best Version of Yourself Possible. And that's kind of an expression that I take from a philosophy. I'm not necessarily making that up. It's a satir family system therapy that I will refer to some of their philosophies here and there. But how to be the best version of ourselves possible is the task that we all sort of have at hand. And it reminds me of how we all know what's good for us, but how do we do what we know is good for us? So, there is an imaginative, creative piece in how we be the best version of ourselves possible. And the word imagine comes from includes the word image. So it does help to, take a breath and close your eyes and imagine what your best version of yourself is possible. And that is an image that you can hold on to and live up to it as best as you can. So everything else we talk about today is going to be focused around how to live our best lives imaginable. And that doesn't mean going to Disneyland and silliness like that. It means wherever you are at any given time, whether it's a bank lineup or the bathroom or with your families or in the forest, how do you feel the way you want to feel instead of feeling how you think you should feel or how other people tell you to feel? Because people will say and do things and they'll try to put their feelings upon you. But maintaining one's personal power includes practicing feeling the way you want to feel. And we humans do go to great lengths to feel certain feelings. We buy tickets and go places, and we buy things and we travel around, and it looks like we're ants on an anthill running in circles from above. And really, we're all trying to feel a certain feeling. And universally, those feelings are typically safety. We want to, have the things that we need to live a safe existence. We want to feel inspired. We want to feel connected, which is another word for love. Connected means we want to see and be seen. We want to understand and be understood. We're social animals, so we need a bit of reassurance from the people around us that what we're doing is okay. And when we perceive that somebody's disapproving of what we're doing, it kind of hits us hard if we think that people don't like us or that there's a conflict in an important relationship. Then that is typically the thing that is a topic of any therapy, is how to improve relationships with other people. And we know ourselves through our relationships with other people. And our favorite people in the world are typically the people that when we're around them, we like ourselves more when we're around them. So as a bit of an exercise, you can imagine some of your favorite people and then imagine how you are around them. And that is a little example of how we are our best versions of ourselves at certain moments. So, you can't choose your family, but you can choose your friends. And typically the friends that we have in our lives are the people that support us, the kinds of people where we can tell them a difficult story and they'll basically say, yeah, that sounds difficult. And that makes us feel like we've been understood and seen and heard, and that we matter. They validate us, they acknowledge us, that our concerns are important and stuff like that. So likewise, when somebody comes to you, they, I'll say as a gendered thing, men have a typical predisposition to jump into problem solving mode and want to do something to solve the problem. And I coach men to just say, I hear the problem, that sounds difficult. Because that is the number one thing that we actually want when we're expressing some problem, is for somebody else to be like, yeah, that sounds really hard. And just knowing that we've been heard allows us to take a bit of a breath and a little bit of weight off our shoulders, and then we can go running around trying to solve the actual problem. But yeah, I assume everybody can relate to that phenomenon, and not necessarily in men, but in all genders. People really just want to know that they've been heard, first of all. So it is important when somebody's expressing something to focus and be like, yeah, okay, right. And really, being with someone, being attuned with someone includes that piece of compassion that Vicky had mentioned earlier, which is compassion is a big big deal, and we can all pronounce it, but to really know what it means is beyond a definition. It's something that you kind of have to feel, not think about. And I describe to people that there's like, sympathy is here, and then there's empathy, and then there's compassion. And the Dalai Lama says compassion is the answer to everything. And that really means compassion for yourself and compassion for others. And what does compassion mean? I can define it for a long time, but it includes an element of recognizing somebody else's actions as a manifestation of themselves, including their suffering. So if you're encountering somebody that's presenting a difficulty for you, to not take it personally includes having the sort of compassion for them where you can see what they're doing. They might be calling you words or yelling in your face or whatever like that. You can look at them, and instead of taking it personally and suffering for yourself, you can see that what they're doing is a manifestation of their personal suffering. And when you see it that way, you can then have compassion for them. You can have compassion for them and know that they are doing their best, and this is what their best looks like. And when you really see that everybody's just, going about their personal lives, living out their expectations, assumptions, and ideas, then and that it's all about them, everybody's expression is all about them, then we don't have to take anything personally anymore. And that is another topic that is hard for people to grasp, because people are taught that they have to take things personally. And I've seen people, when they really understand that when somebody is away that's difficult around them, and that they have a choice to not take anything personally anymore, it's a liberating feeling. It's a way of freedom to not take anything personally again, because it's whatever anybody else is doing says everything about them and nothing about you yourself. So that is a small way that we can allow ourselves to be free, is by really understanding that what other people do, we can have compassion for instead of internalizing ourselves, because we are only responsible for ourselves. We cannot be in control of anybody else's actions in any way. So that is a big piece of being the best version of yourself possible, because what we're doing, part of that includes not having needless suffering. So communication is to relationship what breathing is to life, is another Satir quote. And I know Pat's video is off, but she'll be smiling a half smile, because this is another pillar of that model, is how to communicate in important relationships. So I'll say the quote again. It's, communication is to relationship what breathing is to life. So that doesn't mean we need large, eloquent words. In fact, the shorter, smaller, easier the words are, the better. And words aren't the only communication. We communicate through our body, through our energy, through just nonverbal, like nods and smiles, stuff like that. That's also communication. And our very presence is another form of communication. So you don't need to know what to say, but you can have a warm presence around somebody when they're having a difficulty. And I'm a counselor, and I talk this kind of stuff all the time, and sometimes there just simply are no words for some events or sufferings or struggling. And I do practice expressive therapy. And when people ask what it is, I describe it in simplest forms. It's when there are no words to describe things, or when we need to express something, but the words don't exist to express something, because there are not always the words. So communication is to relationship what breathing is to life. And that includes with ourselves, communicating with ourselves. You would think it'd be simple, but it's not. And one of the things we're going to talk about here, we'll keep circling back to, is how do we feel how we want to feel instead of how we think we should feel. When we communicate with ourselves, it requires a bit of a pause button. Like if you can imagine a pause button somewhere, I often put my hand on my heart when I'm like, okay, I just need a second here to collect my thoughts and feelings. And I'll often say, I'll articulate my feelings to myself. So, you know, as especially a man, you're raised to think there's like three emotions: happy, sad, and mad. Which is obviously pretty limited. And there are, in fact, not only hundreds of feelings, but thousands of combinations of feelings. So it can be quite complex. Like when somebody dies, we can feel grief and we can feel relief because maybe their suffering is over or something like that. So there are often overlapping emotions that can be quite confusing. And that confusion can cause stress. Stress is guaranteed, but it's how we deal with the stress. So keeping my thread, relationship with the self, communication with the self sounds like articulating your feelings to yourself. So if something difficult happens in my world, I'll pause and think, okay, I feel confused and frustrated and exasperated, maybe a bit hopeless and maybe a bit helpless with all of this. And that's pretty big feelings. And as soon as I've just articulated it's a relief, because all of a sudden now I'm exerting some awareness or control over my feelings, so that I practice that control over my feelings so that my feelings don't control me. And that's something to practice is how to control our feelings instead of having our feelings control us. And we will find ourselves with difficult feelings, and it's really important to know that we are allowed to feel however we feel. We don't need to apologize for our feelings because it's our true self, and we don't need to apologize for our true self. When we articulate maybe out loud how we feel about something, it's also important to use I language. I feel this way, not you're making me feel this way, and all that stuff, because that gets into blame, and we're not taking responsibility for our actions and our feelings. And if we don't take responsibility, then we can't really process it properly because it's actually ours. And if we put it on somebody else, then it makes that relationship strained. And there are little tiny subtle words that we can sometimes use that we don't realize we're blaming other people when we're blaming other people. Some of those words just sound like I'm disappointed in you. That implies a bit of like a conditional love, where if you do this, then I will remove my care for you. An improvement over disappointed would be displeased, because that implies that you're taking ownership for your emotions. You're not putting it on somebody else, because we do have a choice of feeling. We can feel how we want to feel and how we choose to feel. So I will hear myself saying, sometimes when I'm practicing control, I choose to feel this way or that way. I might not say that out loud to everybody at the time, but wherever I'm feeling, I have full responsibility for it. And I know that I'm feeling that because in some part of me needs to feel that, and that's a choice. And when one is feeling something that's really heavy, like despair or hopelessness, it's not to be pushed away or swept under the carpet or distracted from. It's better to examine it and almost embrace it and lean into it. As Robert Frost says, the only way out is through. And really do an inventory on why we think we feel that way. And then what that feeling is allowing us to do. So, an example of somebody passes away that we care a lot about, we're going to feel, grief and relief and all these other things too that might conflict with each other. But we don't typically, the scariest part about being in a dark feeling is that also there's a fear that we're going to be stuck in that dark feeling. And the anxiety around the fear of being stuck in that feeling will contribute to the dark feeling. So along with we're allowed to feel however we feel at any given time also goes with, and there, I just saw a comment there, I'll read it in a second. Doesn't like it. And so also how to get unstuck from whatever feeling that we might be stuck in. I'm just going to read this comment out loud here. It is sometimes hard to share a feeling, especially with someone who doesn't like to talk about feelings. Do you have any suggestions as to how to deal with this? Well, first of all, I wonder, it's okay to talk about your personal feelings without an expectation that the other person is going to talk about their feelings. And that's one part. And I'll jump to, when we do have the vulnerability to talk about our feelings, we actually, it might sound like this can of worms or that you're opening up this big mess, but I'm consistently surprised at how fast it solves all the issues that are actually happening. And not just in like relationships, but like business people and boardroom decisions. I will facilitate, decision-making process. And when I ask some people certain things about how do they feel about that, it makes the process go a lot faster. So it's a bit of a paradox in that way. It's like when you press pause to really dig into your truth, and then you say whatever your true truth is, you skip a lot of the mess in the middle. So we are typically cultured to be raised that feelings can be somewhat dangerous. And I say, be dangerous. feel your life and allow other people's feelings to be expressed. And you want to be a safe person for other people to express their feelings too. Yeah, that's kind of in response to that question. Don't be afraid to just, what is that, brutal honesty? There's another word for it, extreme truth, something like that. And not to apologize for expressing your feelings ever, because like I said earlier, we wouldn't apologize for being ourselves. And we have to accept that our feelings are part of ourselves. And it's also okay to say, this is a really important feeling, the word confusion, the feeling confusion. We can say, instead of, so how about this? Typically when somebody says I'm angry, or when somebody thinks I'm angry, they're actually confused because there's been some sort of injustice. And the easiest thing to get upset about is something that's unfair or unjust. If you think about, if you were to do an inventory on what your triggers are, the things that are your real pet peeves, it's typically like things that aren't fair. So the reason why things aren't fair is because, it's two things. It's this one thing, and then it's this other thing over here. So that is a form of confusion. So when in doubt of what your feelings are, you can say, I feel confused. And I'll say that people have an easier time hearing I've been confused compared to I feel angry. So if you could not use the word angry as much and substitute it with confused, frustrated, exasperated, something like that, those are typically the universal ingredients of anger. And people find it easier to talk about. The word anger is a really loaded word, and we use it, and it implies violence and stuff too, which is an inadvertent threat. So like if you hear somebody say I'm angry, it's like, well, are they going to lose it and start knocking things around or what? So anger is universally includes confusion. And so people have an easier time to talk about confusion than they do talking about anger. And it allows you to examine, to kind of dissect that emotion, whereas anger is more confusing to dissect than confusion. So that's, yeah, I have some notes here that I'm allowing me to structure what goes where. In the description of this also included the idea of responding versus reacting, and how to observe, how to get unstuck from feelings, how to develop healthy habits, and how to feel how we want to feel. So I took care of that last one in a bit of a way, but I want to jump to the difference between responding and reacting. So there's a notion in many psychological realms that sounds like this: all your power and freedom lie in the moment between the stimulus and the response. So stimulus is that button, that trigger, that something's unfair, something's unjust, something's is about to make us really upset. And if we have the wherewithal to press pause, take a moment and consider some other alternatives, then we're able to deliver a response instead of a reaction. So a reaction is synonymous with volatility, or like, somebody says something and you snap right back at them. That's a reaction. Whereas a response, one's ability to respond is one's responsibility. So a response-able person is somebody that can be like, okay, let me just consider and kind of develop the best response. And that the time it takes to press pause and develop a response instead of a reaction saves you a lot of mess to clean up later. Because if we do find ourselves reacting, then we have to go back and usually revise or remediate some of the things that we said that we wish we hadn't have said. So again, all your power and freedom lie in the moment between the stimulus and the response. The freedom that you have and the power that you have is that you don't have to be condemned to reacting the way that you thought you had to react. So if somebody calls you a name, you might think, oh, I have a great excuse to get mad. I'm going to be mad now because that person called me a name, and I can stomp around and practice all that. You don't have to be condemned to that. You have the freedom to respond to how you want to respond and feeling how you want to feel. So, that quote is one way of saying it. There are a bunch of ways of saying it that everybody's probably heard a version of it before. But if we all want freedom, we all want power. And as much as we can control that moment between the stimulus and the response, then the more we have practice over our freedom and power. Is we don't want to give away our power to somebody by giving them the reaction that they were trying to poke us to give. Pat, you had your hand up. Oh, look at that, a little yellow hand. Go ahead. I can't hear you though. You got to turn your mic. Okay.
Right. Sorry about that. Yeah. I was just when you're talking about how hard it is to share feelings sometimes, and the person that you're trying to share your feelings with, you said this, that we don't want them to do anything necessarily. We just want to be heard and validated, and maybe we want to be comforted, or maybe we want to have somebody understand us. But I was just thinking that it's sometimes helpful if we could actually say that to people that we're talking to say to them, I don't need you to do anything. I just want you to hear how sad I am right now. And that was one thing I just thought of while you were talking. And the other thing was, sometimes the word feeling itself is the scary word. So when we say, I feel angry, or I feel guilty, or I feel something, that sets somebody off. We can just say, I am sad. And it makes a difference just to express the feeling, not to label it as a feeling. Anyway, I throw that out there, just hear what you or others think about it. It struck me while you were talking, so I thought I'd share it.
I appreciate that. There are these little tiny things we can do in our language that really informs our attitude in big ways later on. Like another example is to not say I should anything, and it's described as shoulding all over yourself, because it implies a judgment where if you don't do it, you're going to be some kind of failure. Instead, allow the possibility of the word could instead of should. I could do this. Right? So I never tell anyone that they should do anything. I only say, you could do that, or, it's about it, you have the power, it's your freedom. You can do anything you want to do. You can imagine how that would have spin-offs of benefits to scratch the word should from one's, you could scratch the word should from your vocabulary. And you'll see the difference it makes, but there are a lot of little subtleties in our language, not just English, any language, and we don't realize what we're saying often, and it does have a big effect. But yeah, Pat, you're right. The word feeling is kind of like a dangerous word, but you can just say, I'm confused. I'm sad. I just need you to be sitting next to me for a moment. You might not even want a hug or a back rub. You might just want to sit next to somebody or around somebody and have the presence of them with you. And that in itself is enough. And there doesn't have to be a big solution. So getting unstuck from our feelings. So all these feelings, where are they in our body? They're in our, they come from our thoughts and our attitudes in our brain, as well as they're in our body. And I often ask people where they feel it when they, when something is unfair or unjust, and they'll say, oh, there's a tightness in my throat or my shoulders or my neck or my stomach, or I'll clench my jaws, or I frown, make these wrinkles happen. But we can practice some control over our feelings by getting into our bodies, and that breath that we take to relieve some of the tension. If we can feel where our tension is, we can breathe into the tension, then breathe out the tension, and use our bodies to our advantage as a resource. Our bodies are a resource. So, any problem requires finding the resources to meet the challenge. And we can use our bodies as the resource to meet the challenge of our feelings, if our feelings are challenging at the time, or our thoughts are challenging at the time. You can kind of get out of this, brain in our skull that just an organ that we put so much importance onto our thoughts. We believe everything we think as if they're true. And we don't have to have that suffering for the things that are going on in our brains or in our feelings all the time. We can practice changing the channel. And that leads me to the notion of observing. And I know everything I've said, everyone has heard in some variation before, but I'm kind of patching it together in some kind of a quilt of an hour and a half of how to be the best version of yourself possible. So what was it I just said? How to observe. So that means if I feel like something is big and coming like that, like anger, which I said was frustration or confusion or perplexity, or I will observe that feeling coming into me and be like, oh, there's gee, what, I don't really want to feel this. Maybe I'll, I know it's going to pass, but here I am with it. And I don't want to push it away. I want it to be information that I can do something with. I don't want to be stuck in it. So, okay, what do I do? My 1, 2, 3. Consider, take a breath, kind of check in with my body, do a scan, get my feet on the ground, feel grounded, look out at the horizons. What I'm doing right now, there's a window, and that's one of the ways I feel free, is by looking out at where the land meets the sky. And that gives me the perspective of okay, I'm just this little thing here. Doesn't have to be the sky is falling kind of thing. So I get some kind of perspective and use my body as a resource. And I observe the feeling coming in, it's with me, and then knowing it's going to go, eventually it goes, and I allow myself to notice it passing through. And I'm like, okay, there goes that feeling. Whew, that was a heavy feeling while it was here. And kind of do 1, 2, 3. I wonder about it. I use a lot of curiosity and wonderment. And then allow it to just be what it was. And sometimes there's no explanation for the feeling. It just sort of is something that strikes us from something unconscious that happened, that reminds us, our bodies, of something that happened in the past. And we can be quite confused. Why am I feeling this way? I mean, I have everything imaginable, and yet still I feel this despair or disconnection and stuff like that. Also, that's observing the self, and then observing others includes that same practice of, I guess I visualize Pat is in Winnipeg right now in the prairies. And if you imagine yourself on a prairie and there's a train coming in the far distance, you might hear it before it comes. And then, you see it and it's getting closer and bigger. And then it's right in your face. That's a big feeling. And then, it's going to go by, and then, oh, there it goes, and then disappears, and then you can't hear it anymore. And that's kind of how you observe your own feelings sometimes, as well as other people's action when other people come across your stage, with that metaphor too. So practicing observing means that you don't latch, you don't suffer for the unmet expectations. Like if, attachment is the root of suffering, according to philosophies, then if we're attached to an outcome or an expectation, then we're going to be disappointed when it's not what we imagined. So when we're able to observe it go by, then we don't have to be so invested in it when it doesn't turn out the way that we had imagined it to. Um, so, practicing that observation, I would say includes a practice of gratitude and appreciation. So that sounds like, well, this person just came into my world and did this big song and dance, and then they left again. And I'm gracious. I mean, they're a person doing what they're doing, and I just got to see it. And there's a sacredness to watching somebody else's difficult feelings, because it is their vulnerability and it is them being um, um, honest with themselves. And so when we see somebody dysregulating or being volatile or reactive, not to judge them as being bad or a jerk or anything like that, but to have reverence, because what we're seeing is a manifestation of their suffering, and that suffering is a sacred special thing for them. And it's not our time to condemn that vulnerability by calling them a jerk. It's our time to have compassion for their vulnerability by looking at them and thinking, oh man, that they're having a hard time, and this is how hard of a time they're having. Because I believe we're all doing the best that we can do at any given time. And some people's best looks like this, and some people's best looks like that, and your own personal best looks like this or this on any certain day. But we are always doing our best, and this is what our best looks like. And it's like the Popeye the Sailorman quote: "I am what I am, and that's all that I am." It means that you have acceptance for others, and you have acceptance for yourself, and then you don't have to suffer with the judgment, your perceived judgment of others, that others are judging you, and you don't have to suffer with the judging yourself. We do make mistakes, and when we make a mistake, we beat ourselves up for it once, and that's one mistake for one beating yourself up, and that should cross off, and it's called reconciled. And you've done a clearing, it's one for one, and you don't have to beat yourself up about that thing anymore. And that's part of compassion and forgiveness for yourself. So when you do make a mistake and you beat yourself up about it, then let it go, because you've done it one for one. But some people will beat themselves up for the next 20, 30, 40 years about something that they did a long time ago. And that's another form of needless suffering that prevents us from being the best versions of ourselves possible. So don't beat yourself up more than once for any given thing, because we are our own worst critics. And we don't want to be judging other people either, because they're doing their best, and that's what that looks like. So we are always giving our 100%, but just sometimes our 100% looks like it's 50%. Sometimes our best looks like crap, but that is our best. And on a good day, our best looks great, and on a bad day, our best doesn't look so good. But we are always doing our best. And when you act that way, that when you believe that you are doing your best and this is what it is, and your daily motto is to try to wake up in the morning and put your best foot forward and live your best life, then when things don't turn out the way you want, you can't judge yourself about it, because you know that was your best, and that's all it looks like. Yeah, the train analogy works. Thanks for the comment. So the other part of our best self is practicing presence. So if people have anxiety or stress, anxiety is related to a worry about the future or a worry about the past. And when we're in our present moment, we don't worry about the future or the past, so there's less anxiety. And we have ways of being present. We watch movies to be present. That's an easy example. We exercise, we make art, we make music. That's all part of being in the present moment. And when we are doing something creative, we are in the present moment. We're not focusing on the future or the past, we're focusing on the present. When we breathe and when we focus on our breath, when we're focusing on our breath, we can't focus on anything else. You can only focus on one thing at a time. So one way to relieve anxiety is in meditation practice is to focus on the breath. And if we're focusing on the breath, we cannot be focusing on anything else. And that is a form of presence and a form of peace. And when I talk with people about what people call addictions or habits, sometimes it's about losing their presence. because they have an idea of a way they want to feel in the future. So they might start drinking or something like that in order to feel that feeling. But again, reminding ourselves that we are in control of how we feel and we have access to whatever feeling we want to feel. There's a practice where before you get out of bed in the morning, you embody the feeling that you want to feel, and you're not allowed to put your feet in the ground and get out of bed until you are certain that you can carry that feeling through the day with you. That's an interesting meditation that I heard recently that I tried myself, and it's kind of a good way to start the day. Just to feel how you want to feel and carry that feeling with you throughout the day. So we talked also a bit about connections in general and how we want to understand and be understood and see and be seen and love and be loved, because that's validating, and it allows us, connection is not just with other people, but it's with the land. And when we are feeling that stress, another stress reliever is, how am I connected right now? And some people visualize they're standing on a floor, but the floor is eventually connected to the ground, and they imagine themselves as a tree with roots growing into the ground or something like that. That's one way to feel connected when you're all alone. But our connections are so important to us that the latest research in what they call addictions, and I keep saying what they call addictions because I think the word addiction is pretty loaded and a bit judgmental too. But whereas if we had more compassion and called addictions like a habit that's connected to impulsivity and compulsivity, then it gives us more power and freedom to reshape that habit or impulsivity or compulsivity, and not have to pathologize it into what people call addictions anymore. But I was going to say the connection is antonymous with addiction. So the latest research is people that are lacking connection are people that are more likely to succumb to addiction. So the cure for addiction is connection. So what does that look like for one? Connection, can be being social, or it can be connected to the land, having your feet on the ground and feeling that. I just talked a mile a minute for quite a while. I want to pause and see if anyone wants to throw in a voice or a comment or anything like that, or a question on how to do any of the stuff I talked about. So I'm just going to pause for a second, see if anybody chimes in. Okay. Practicing gratitude and appreciation in relationships is, I came up with this metaphor where it's like you're shining a light on the path that you want somebody to follow. So I have teenagers, and I'll say, hey, thanks for bringing your dish to the sink and washing it. And they hadn't done it yet, but they're like, holding their dish and like, oh, and they walk up to and they wash their dish in the sink or whatever. And it's like, anyway, practicing appreciations and, and gratitude is a way that we can feel peaceful. And I don't like to hear myself give orders or command people. So I find myself saying thanks for something that they haven't done yet. But when they know that I'm thankful, they're more likely to do it. Yeah. The gratitude and appreciation piece is another default response when you don't know what to say. You can say thanks for. So when somebody is expressing something difficult to you, like a friend or a family or something like that, I always try to say, well, thanks for saying something, because it's difficult for people to express difficult things, because it's not like they just want to go around telling everybody everything difficult. So I appreciate when people are vulnerable. And I have an easy time expressing gratitude for almost everything imaginable. And that does kind of take the edge off difficult situations, and it makes things easy. It's good to have a few default responses to things that happen as a surprise, when surprising things happen. So like circling back where I said, all your power and freedom lie in the moment between the stimulus and the response. The ability to practice gratitude is a response. The ability to have compassion for somebody is a response. So having gratitude and compassion is a way to respond instead of react. If, a clue that you might be reacting is if you find yourself with your feelings hurt, or which means taking things personally. If you find your feelings hurt about anything that anybody says or does, that's an opportunity to be like, oh, wait a second, this is what that Joseph guy was talking about. I'm gonna press pause on saying or doing anything and do a little inventory on why I feel this strongly about it, and own it. Have the responsibility to own your feelings without having to say, you're making me feel this way or that way. Yeah. I try to be as succinct as possible, and I wanted to make sure I covered everything I had to cover. And for the most part, that's encompassed the majority of my notes for this presentation. I could keep talking for a long time, but I do want to kind of open it up. Pat, is there anything that, or Vicky, that
Yeah. I'm unmuted now. Yeah. Well, I've just been deep in thought about what you've been saying, actually, especially what you said about that. There's that window between, what you hear, or what's going on, and the response, the stimulus and the response. And that's I've always looked at that window as a place of choice, that you have the opportunity to make a choice. And I find, especially as I mentioned earlier today, that having so much time with my sisters, and of course, I mean, we're all in my two younger sisters are in their late 60s. I'm 70. We have a long history together where we have different interpretations of what even happened in our own family, and or who did what when, and it's easy to react to that and think, oh, you're wrong, or you're just looking at it from a weird angle or something like that, but which is very unkind and non-compassionate. And I find for myself just having to just really take that moment before getting stimulated, because I know that I've got a choice of how I'm going to respond. And I can respond in a way that is, well, I'm the older sister, I'm a counselor, I know more than you do, or some way that is not at all helpful in creating the relationship that I want to have with my sisters. So I do bite my tongue a lot, and I'm sure they do too.
Mm-hmm.
And you make a choice and you think, okay, so what's a compassionate thing, or what's an understanding, what's an empathetic thing I could say, rather than a judgment, or giving a suggestion, or telling somebody what to do, or saying you're wrong, or using a judgment. Anyway, so I'm deep in that thinking right now, because I've just had 2 weeks of it every day. And I'm very reminded.
We have the power to express anything imaginable, and it's an opportunity. So every moment is an opportunity of personal transformation, or any transformation. Every moment is an opportunity to express connection or disconnection. And when we really understand that we actually have a choice, then it becomes a no-brainer. Like, I only want to express connection. I don't want to express something that others somebody else. And I say others that way because it's the simplest definition of colonialism is othering, where if there's an expression of us and them, that is the simplest description I've come across of colonialization, which is oppression. So we don't want to oppress others. We don't want to oppress ourselves. Yeah, I I want to only express connection and, well, truth and love in the way of compassion for everything and everybody. And when I see people having a difficult time, I don't get mad. I'm not a person that honks their horn. I don't give my finger to people on the street. If somebody's cutting me off in traffic, I say, there you go. Be my guest. You need to cut in front of me. It's your road too. And it's surprising people, like when people would expect me to give them the finger in traffic because they know they cut me off or whatever, I just wave at them and say, it's okay. I got it. I saw you coming. I knew you were confused. So it's a good metaphor, and it eliminates road rage, which, you know, the more road rage that you see, then people think that they have to get upset. It's a really great example of, you know, if somebody cuts you off, you think you have a great excuse to honk your horn. Some people just love to honk their horn. I've driven with people that have reached over and tried to honk my horn because they see that somebody did something to me. And I'm like, don't honk my horn. I can honk my own horn if I want to. I saw that they were going to make that mistake, and I had the awareness. I saw the train come in, and there I stopped before it hit us or whatever. But that's the, you know, I guess being impeccable with your word, so to speak. It means you speak with integrity and you say only what you mean. You avoid using your words against yourself, and you avoid gossiping with other people. And the definition of gossip, and a lot of people don't know this, is just talking about other people. And that's the lowest form of communication. The next lowest form of communication is talking about events, which sounds fine. The best form of conversation is talking about ideas. So I noticed when I'm in contact with other people and the conversation somehow goes to talking about other people, I can change gears by shifting it into the domain or the realm of ideas instead of the realm of talking about people or events. And talking about ideas it requires creativity, and that's often our favorite conversations, is when we get to develop ideas about things instead of judgments about people. So I find it impossible for me to gossip or talk about people because I have compassion for them, and there's nothing bad to say about anybody because they're just doing what they're doing, and it's got nothing to do with me. I can express confusion or bewilderment. I'm like, geez, I don't know why that guy did that. I'm confused. I can only wonder what's going on for them, but I don't ever say things like, oh, that guy was such a so-and-so for doing such and such. That's ridiculous. Doesn't go anywhere. It just makes me look like a fool for not being able to handle somebody else's suffering. And yeah, remembering, you know, circling around, yeah, somebody said, it sounds like the more we practice this way, the easier it will get. And it's true. The better you get at this stuff, the better you get at it. And like another expression is, you spot it, you got it, where it's like, oh, that's that person doing that. Right. I saw this before. I know how to deal with this. But if you keep your head in the sand about it, you won't improve. So yeah, the better you get, the better you get. And the other part of that is other people around you don't know how well you're doing often. People don't know that you didn't just flip out right now. They just see you sitting there being cool. In your head, you're like biting your tongue and sometimes, but they just see you doing, you know, being normal. They don't see you not doing what you're not doing. So allow yourself to appreciate yourself when you do notice yourself having more patience and compassion for people, because nobody is going to say, wow, you just had a lot of compassion for that person. It's thankless. We're not doing it for the thanks anyway. But yeah, the better you get at it, the better you get at it. And then comment, is apologizing when we say something wrong a good habit to form? Yes, and instead of yes, and is a compromise, or what is it? Improv. I find myself saying yes and a lot. I did this funny improv workshop, and the definition of improv is whatever happens, you say yes and you just keep making stuff up. You never say no but, because that shuts everything down. So is apologizing when we say something wrong a good habit to form? I don't have a hard time saying, I'm sorry I said that. And here's what I do then. I say, if I could go back, I would have said it this way instead. And that shows that you've learned something. So it's not for nothing. But I apologize less for just being myself. I don't apologize for my feelings. Because when you apologize, it means that you're rejecting something that you've done yourself. So is apologizing when we say something wrong a good habit to form? Yes, as long as you apologize with your dignity and honor in mind and not give away your true self. But don't just go around apologizing for anything and everything. And some people will apologize as a bit of a strategy or a tactic, and it can work to make the other person apologize or something too. But that's not the real motivation for apologizing. If there's actually interesting, I've Googled and I've looked up, researched on the internet how to apologize, and it can go like this. This is really, because this is all wrapped up with forgiveness, and it's a good topic because forgiveness is really hard to get your people's head around it. But I'll circle back to apologizing, but I'll say about forgiveness is, when we've forgiven somebody for something, it means that when we think of them now, they have no more power than this pen. We know that we've forgiven somebody because there's no more charge in the memory of them or whatever anymore, or of ourselves. And forgiveness does not mean that what happened is okay. Forgiveness does mean that what happened is in the past and it can't be changed. That's the real definition of forgiveness. It's in the past and it can't be changed. We would wish it would have went a different way, but it went the way it went, and we are where we are. So there's nothing we can do about it to change it. It's in the past and it can't be changed. And so we don't want to suffer needlessly for that thing in the past that can't be changed. We don't want to suffer at all, but part of forgiveness is letting go of that suffering. And forgiveness is described as actually a selfish act where you set yourself free, not the other person. So if you have a grudge against somebody for something, or unforgiven, whatever, maybe the grudge isn't the best word to use, but they don't know that you have those big of feelings for them. And often people are waiting for them to say some kind of like, I'm so sorry for what I did. And you're never going to get what you think you want from somebody saying sorry. So you can forgive somebody without ever telling them that you've forgiven them. And chances are they don't even know that they're unforgiven to start with. So it's, when we forgive somebody, we set ourselves free because we've let go of that attachment of that outcome that's not going to happen. And when we're asking for forgiveness, which is the apologizing piece, it helps to say, I call it the time machine phrase, where it's like, if I could go back in time, I would have done it this way instead. And that's not enough, though. We also have to say, I did what I did knowing that it might harm or hurt you, and I did it anyway. And for that, I'm truly sorry, because I don't want to hurt you. When we hear that, that's a real deep apology. Like a non-apology is like, actions happened, mistakes were made, people are going to feel sorry. That's like the lamest apology ever, right? And you hear the government saying that all the time. Mistakes were made. It's like, well, how about we made a mistake? That actually lands. So likewise, it lands when we say, I did what I did and I hid it from you because I knew in my heart of hearts it was something against you and it was hard towards you. And I'm truly sorry. And I never wanted to hurt you. And now that I've realized what I've done, there was no going back, and I'm ashamed, and that's why I kept it hidden. That's a good part of apology. And then saying, if I could go back, I would have done it this way, and describe with some detail how you would have done things differently. And then taking it forward, making amends. somehow, making, and obviously there's some things that you can't really fix, but just saying, I want to make amends and I'm going to rack my brain and think about how to make amends, that goes a long way. So apologies, we're not taught how to apologize, and we're not really taught how to forgive in our lives, in our families, in our schools. And I'll say that a lot of our ideas about forgiveness is also kind of wrapped up with the church's religion and Christianity and stuff, and that's pretty confusing for everybody, not just Christians. But the ideas of forgiveness include the stakes are high, because there's the element of condemnation in there, and conditional love. And unconditional love. So if, when our parents maybe said, like, I'm disappointed in you, that's an inadvertent threat that if we do that mistake again, their love for us is going to be taken away. And in relationship, the conflicts in relationship are often can be categorized as a perception of threat or a perception of neglect. And it's important to remember the word perception there, because it's not actually neglect and it's not actually threat. Remember, it's actually the other person suffering doing what they're doing, and we're interpreting it to be about us. So we're suffering for taking it personally and taking offense when it's actually our perception that there's a threat, or a perception that there's a neglect. And if we perceive it, it might be completely true. The other person might be blatantly threatening you and neglecting you. But maintaining your personal power and freedom reminds you that you're worth it. Everybody's worth it. Everybody is worthy of love, and everybody, and there is love for everybody, and people love you that don't even know you. Yeah, it's important to know that we are loving beings and we live in a world of love, and we want peace. And when that's shattered, it can shake our world a bit. I'm going to read this comment. Because sometimes I say things that are hurtful towards another person, and I was wondering if that restores the relationship, especially if you have said something out of anger. So yes, when we inevitably say something hurtful towards another person, and I will talk about the word hurtful, because it is a bit of a tricky word, because people will say you're being hurtful when maybe you're not being hurtful. And if somebody is calling you hurtful, it's accusing you of intentionally hurting them. And you might not be. You might actually just be saying a feeling, and they're feeling responsible for your feeling. So they call you hurtful because they're uncomfortable with you expressing your honest feeling. Does that make sense? Okay. Sometimes I think I'm too philosophical, but the word hurtful can be used really improperly in relationship. So I caution everybody, if somebody says you're being hurtful, to not believe that you're being hurtful necessarily. You might just be saying, I'm confused, or I'm sad, or I didn't like the way that thing turned out. And them calling you hurtful is actually an expression of them being confused about what you're saying. So you can, when somebody says that you're being hurtful, you can certainly apologize and say, I don't mean to be hurtful. This is a difficult thing for me, and I don't quite know what the words are to express it. Like you said, especially if you've said something out of anger. Yeah, that anger is that confusion and that frustration and exasperation and helplessness and hopelessness, because you're helpless because you don't really know how to describe this difficulty. It feels hopeless because you're not sure if you're ever going to resolve this confusion, and your relationship with that person is so important that it really stings if you are accused of hurting them or being hurtful. So yeah, I'm glad. Thank you for bringing up the word hurtful, because it's really, really tricky, backwards, sometimes blamey word, and it deflects people from taking responsibility for their own feelings. And it discourages others from expressing their feelings. Because if I go up to somebody I care about and say, I feel this way about what you said the other day, they could take my expression of my feeling as a word against them. And if they call me hurtful, then I'm going to be less likely to be honest and express my feelings around them anymore. And then everybody suffers. We really want our special people to feel safe with their vulnerability around us. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, please, Pat.
Yeah, I was just thinking of when we say, when we use that word hurtful, it comes across as a judgment of the other, of ourselves.
Mhm.
If we say that we were hurtful, that concept that you're deliberately trying to hurt somebody, it comes across that way. Or if we call somebody else, you hurt me, it's like blaming them for how we feel rather than just saying how we feel. And we can acknowledge that if we said something in anger and we said something horrible to somebody we love, we can acknowledge that we could say, like, when I yelled at you yesterday morning, I think you were really hurt. And then you can have a conversation about it. And they can say, yes, you really hurt me. And then you can explain and say, and apologize if that wasn't your intention. Or talk about what your intention was, or your, whatever you were feeling. But that's an interesting point about that word hurtful. And it's a good thing to be aware of.
It's the only word like that too, actually. Like there's certain words that I'm like, ooh, that word. Okay, yeah. Watch out for that one, kind of thing. So it's easy to just stop saying some of these words to people too. Like if you ever find yourself saying to somebody else, you're being hurtful or you're hurtful, just pause and reflect and be like, wait a second, right? This is not them being hurtful. This is them, having a hard time expressing something difficult. And I have a choice to not be hurt. I have a choice to not take it personally. I don't have to have I don't have to take offense. I don't have to take it personally.
It's that window again between the stimulus and the response. Whatever, if somebody accuses you of being hurtful, your first reaction is probably to be defensive. Right? You're going to defend yourself against being blamed or judged.
Yeah.
Oh, gets into another whole layer of blame and judgment.
Yeah.
Confusion.
A whole nother layer of blame and judgment and confusion. So what I just did there was I repeated the last few words that Pat just said. And that is a really effective stalling tactic, as well as a really effective way to let the other person know that I've heard exactly what they said, as well as another way to hear it said and think about it and process a little bit more in my head. So if we're ever feeling confused in a relationship or a conversation with somebody, we don't quite know what to say or do next, when in doubt, just repeat back what you think you heard. And in a relationship, it's a great technique or strategy or practice in communication is to say to somebody, wait a second, before I react or respond, let me just repeat back to you what I think you're saying. So you check in with the person. This is I highly recommend doing this. Say, so I heard you say this, and try to say it like as if you're, replaying the surveillance footage, not interpreting. It sounds easy, but it's really hard. So repeat back what you think you heard without adding extra meaning or interpreting. And then even if you got it exactly right, it still gives them an opportunity to say, wait a minute, let me put it this way instead. And then just let the first thing go and let them put it the next way instead. And then you can repeat that back to them. So you just said this, and they say, yeah. And you can say, okay, let me process this because this is a confusing, tricky one for me. And what you're doing is facilitating a co-creative process. So you and the other person are kind of like holding the conversation between you and examining it so that you're not being blamatory or taking things personally or being heated or accusational or threatening or neglecting or any of that. So practicing that curiosity and wonderment, and practicing the presence of being creative includes holding the object between you, the object of the point of refute or difficulty or confusion. And like I said earlier about othering is a definition of a colonialism or oppression. To not do that, to not other somebody else, is to really become attuned with them and repeat back to them what you think they said, and then they can kind of clarify. And then it's a co-creative process, and it's really hard to do the othering thing where you inadvertently or advertently oppress somebody else. So, anti-oppressive practice, if anybody's ever heard that term before, includes the co-creative process. And those terms come out of Paulo Freire's work with what was for education systems originally, but it applies to everything, relationship and therapy and government governance. So dynamics of oppression in our society start with relationship to relationship, person to person. And when those oppressive practices get turned into policies in government, then it becomes government oppression, which is fraught here in this week or whatever. We all want our freedom. And how do we practice our freedom? And how do we practice our peace? Do we honk our horns and tie ourselves up to a landmark, or do we just go out in the world and practice peace? And world peace starts with person to person and practicing that. So all of the stuff that we're talking about when we practice these effective communication between each other, it eliminates conflict, which eliminates violence. And I don't mean violence necessarily physical violence. Oppression is a form of violence. So calling somebody a name with a swear word is a form of violence. That's what I mean by violence. I guess if someone is intentionally abusive, which sometimes happens in abusive relationships, and that's something that somebody needs. Physical violence, you need some resources, and chances are the person that's being violent needs some strategies on how to communicate better. I'll say this too about abuse. The definition of verbal abuse is name calling, swearing, like yelling, raised voices, threats. And those things aren't always that obvious, but all of that adds up to the definition of verbal abuse, which can be, damaging, of course, and confusing. And it's not the person's fault that's getting abused. But if you are in a relationship, or you observe in relationships where people are yelling and swearing and name calling, and what we all know, gaslighting now is a relatively new term that we all learning what the definition of that means, but it's like discrediting somebody, and name calling, like you're crazy, but they're not crazy. They're actually seeing something that's real, and their credibility is being questioned. That's part of what gaslighting includes. What was the other part of that? Of verbal abuse. Yeah, that's not okay. Verbal abuse is not okay. And often people don't even know that they're being verbally abusive. They're just yelling and swearing and calling the other person a name. But if you can actually like lay out for them what, maybe a moment or two later, that you have a policy for yourself where you won't take verbal abuse, put Google the definition of Wikipedia or whatever of verbal abuse, write it out and put it on a sticky note on your fridge and say, this is not allowed in our relationship anymore. If this is going to start, I'm going to walk away. I could come back or I might not, but I'm worthy of love. I don't need this kind of othering oppression. I don't need this oppression in my life. That's reasonable. Don't have to apologize for asking for peace. You don't have to apologize for rejecting oppression. You don't have to apologize for wanting personal safety and peace. And then physical abuse, that's pretty scary. I take that extremely seriously, and it's never okay to hit or punch or kick or throw around stuff. It's pretty scary too if somebody's slamming stuff and whatever, slamming doors and whatever. It's like you don't actually have to do that. Yeah, people that use their body in that kind of a way are trying to communicate something, and they're at a level. This is the compassion piece, that they don't know how to communicate except for slamming and punching and kicking. Like, oh dear, that's where they're at, but oh dear, they're in my house and it's my husband or something. That's a big deal. So I truly believe that anybody who is violent doesn't actually want to be violent. I think if they had it kind of explained to them that they have a choice, because they don't want to hurt the person that they love, actually. But they lose their control. They get dysregulated, and they use their body to communicate through punching or kicking. And what they're communicating is usually, I'm confused, I'm upset, I don't know what to do, this is how mad I am, kick, punch. That hole in the wall is a symbol of my confusion, kind of thing. And that's kind of not effective. So we can help, I say to people that come to me, it's like, what does that punch in the wall mean? If you could put, a label, a title on that, what would it actually say? And then they actually say it, and then they actually understand that, oh, these words actually said the same thing as that hole in the wall. Huh, maybe I can use words. So, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify things, but yeah, it's a major safety issue. And violence is not necessary. So.
And at the same time, it is what you were saying earlier, in which I also agree with. That person is, oh, am I muted?
No, we can hear you, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, that, the person, as you say, is using their body to express a feeling that they don't know how to express in another way. At the time, they are doing the best they can, as horrible as it is. And as much as we need to protect ourselves from violent people and abusive language, and how it's good to avoid that or be able to not have it in your life, to be able to see that that person somehow is doing the best they can is a real challenge in overcoming judgment and maintaining curiosity after we establish safety. I agree with you. The safety has to come first, but then after that, if we can become curious, either as a friend or a partner or a parent, as a sibling, to try to understand that, maybe can help people find the words that they can use instead of the physical violence, or help them to understand their powerlessness and how they try to achieve some sense of power over others.
Yeah, seeing that the violent person is dysregulated, and by dysregulated, like regulated on a graph would be like this. Dysregulated is like this. So it can be what people call manic or volatile or up and down or whatever. So when when a person is violent, they're dysregulated. they have an elevated, they're in their brainstem with the fight or flight trauma brain. They're not in their prefrontal cortex. So you cannot reason. There's no reasoning. There's no reasoning with somebody that's not in their rational brain. You could be 100% right, but it's not going to land because they're not here. They're in their fight or flight and their brainstem, which is also called the reptilian brain, because that's all a reptile has, is that brainstem. The top of the spinal cord is it. And we humans have this big prefrontal cortex that allows us to do all this reasoning and rationale and feelings. And when people drink alcohol, it shrinks back into your brainstem. Your brain shuts down, section by section, until all that's left is your brainstem. And that's when that shuts down, that's alcohol poisoning, and that's how people die. But when somebody is being super violent, they're not in their full brain. So there's no reasoning with them. You almost have to use like sign language and say, okay, let's take a moment. We'll circle back in 5 minutes, take a walk around the block, get a fresh air, have a drink of water, like buy as much time as you want to buy, because to engage with the person in the moment, it's not real anyway. They're not able to really engage on the level that you need to actually solve the difference or the conflict. Right. So that's how the more people are yelling and fighting at each other, there comes a point where it's like, what are we fighting about again? I don't know. You called me that name. I called you that name, but that was like long after the original point. The ability to disagree is a good skill. It's a good ability. And to know how to, like, conflict can be great. We can't all be the same. We love diversity. Diversity is what keeps us healthy and alive. So welcome it, like welcome differences and welcome conflict and welcome disagreement, but it doesn't have to turn into violence or oppression. So how to disagree, if you have a moment later to look up, if I had it, I could share it on the screen, but it's actually my last name by coincidence, is Graham's Hierarchy of Disagreement. And it's like a pyramid kind of thing. And the top is refuting the central point, where you keep the actual issue talked about. And what can happen in a disagreement is it deteriorates into yelling and name calling and hurt feelings and fighting about hurt feelings and fighting about stuff that happened in a different time, and people forget what they're actually fighting about. But that central point is part of the ability of disagreeing properly. So if you have a chance to look it up, it's called Graham's Hierarchy of Disagreement. And the bottom, the worst imaginable, the lowest level of communicating about a disagreement is name calling. Anyway, if you find yourself name calling, just press pause and remind yourself what the actual point is that you're arguing about. So there's these little red flags that can go off for a person and be like, oh, wait a second. My feelings are hurt right now. Maybe I'm not talking about the actual point anymore. Maybe I'm talking about my hurt feelings, or my, maybe I'm actually communicating my need to be validated or acknowledged. I'm not actually communicating about the thing that we originally started talking about. So that a good word for that is focus. There's a neat story for anyone. It doesn't matter who, but a guy named Bill Gates and another guy named Warren Buffett, and they're both bazillionaires. They happen to be friends too, and they happen to be both asked the same question of what's one word in their life that can describe their success. And they wrote the same word on a piece of paper without knowing it was the same word. And the word is focus. And that's simply your ability to stay on topic and not get distracted. And there are distractions everywhere. Stress is a guaranteed distraction. Anxiety, like, people knocking on your door, the phone ringing, the television, all food, the fridge, that's a great distraction. And we will intentionally distract ourselves from ourselves. So how to be the best version of yourself? It includes focusing on that image that you've imagined of what you want yourself to be. We all got to where we got to in this moment. Like, I put on this clothes because I imagined it and did it. That's a little miniature success, like whatever. But we couldn't get to anywhere that we got to without imagining it first. So that's just an acknowledgement of the power of our imagination. everything we do came out of our imagination. The kind of vehicle you might drive, or kind of clothes you wear, or the kind of place that you work in, or the kind of relationships that you have, the kinds of words that come out of your mouth, the kinds of expressions that you express are all part of your imagination. And like I said, every moment is an opportunity for personal transformation. That means that we're not condemned. We have the freedom. We're not condemned to repeat the mistakes of the past. We can learn from them. We have the freedom to do whatever we want to do. And the moment is now. There's like, you wake up in the morning, or people have like a New Year's resolution, but you can have a resolution anytime, every moment. The ability to start a new habit it allows you to also let go of old habits. And it's like the third genie wish. That's like a wish for more wishes. If there was any habit to start that would take care of everything, it's the habit of having good habits. The habit of challenging yourself to kind of level up, is a video game reference, where it's like, what can I do better this time that I didn't do before? That can be an ongoing self-reflection. So the habit of starting healthy habits, like I said too at the beginning, it's like we all know what's good for us, but how do we do what we know is good for us? How do we do what we know is good for us? And that's like the $1 billion question. So yeah, we can make a list of what we know is good for us, and we can stick to it. And after a while, that will actually become a habit. And we can remind ourselves that we have the freedom to not repeat things that don't work for us. And when we do a bit of an inventory on what are we doing that's not working for me anymore, you can actually examine like, well, why do I smoke cigarettes? Is there something about it that's serving me? What serves me there? What is the feeling I'm looking for when I do that thing? Okay, peace, connection, freedom, safety, inspiration. Okay, so how can I get those things in another way that's healthier for me? That is a big part of practicing how to be the best versions of ourselves possible. And in relationship, our favorite friendships or whatever are the kinds of friendships where we bring out the best in each other. So it's a challenge to the self also. How can I bring out the best in this person, this specific person? And if you're in a couplehood or whatever, you can say, how do we bring out the best in each other? And how do we start bringing out more of the best in each other? And if I imagine the relationship to be the kind of relationship where we bring out the best in each other, what can I do to change in order to contribute towards that goal? And the better you get at it, the better you get at it. Somebody said, it sounds like the more we practice this way, the easier it gets. Of course. That's it. And the better you get at it, the better you get at it. And a lot of people don't know this stuff is not common sense. So it's okay if you hadn't thought of it quite this way before. But now that you've been exposed to this as a possibility, you can take what you want and leave what you want, and remember what you want and do what you want. But all of these things are a way to practice being the best version of yourself possible. And that's the mission statement of our organization at Northern Focus, is to help people become the best versions of themselves possible. And if I'm going to help other people do it, I got to do it myself. So I happen to be a counselor that gets to hear myself say these things all day, every day. So that's part of how I practice it. And there's the element of congruence, where it's what's on the inside equals what's on the outside. So I can't be saying all this stuff to people and then turn around and do the opposite thing somewhere else. So I get to live this freedom and power and congruence in everything I do, because I practice it. And the better I get at it, the better I get at it. And I'm still getting better. So there's no destination. It's one big fun journey. So thanks everybody.